Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the University of Nottingham PGCEi webinar. My name is Helen and I'm the Admissions Manager at Stafford. And joining me this afternoon all the way from the University of Nottingham is Dr. Rupert. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Rupert.
Hi, Helen, and hi, everybody. Nice to see you all.
Okay, and I can see that we do have quite a lot of people that have joined us this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you with us. How are we going to do this webinar this afternoon? I'm just going to briefly introduce you to Stafford, what our role is in the Middle East. I'm then going to hand you over to Dr. Rupert, who is going to chat about the program. And right at the end of the webinar, you will see a section on the right-hand side that says questions. So do type in your questions there so that Dr. Rupert and myself can answer these. You may find that a lot of the questions are exactly the same or very similar, so we will group these questions together and answer them as effectively as possible. Okay, so let's get started. Who is Stafford Associates? Well, Stafford Associates was established in 1993, and we are a resource centre for distance learning education in the Middle East. And we're currently the resource centre for 5 UK universities, one of which is the University of Nottingham. Now, we do offer a variety of programs, ranging from certificates to diplomas, bachelors, MBAs, MScs, as well as doctorates. So we really do have programs for all your professional and personal needs. Now, our function here is to assist students throughout their application process. So you have obviously been in touch with quite a few of our academic consultants, and that's why you're here this afternoon. And we do also offer some academic support as well. I'm now going to hand you over to Dr. Rupert, and I will join you towards the end of the webinar. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Helen. I'm going to talk to you about the University of Nottingham and our School of Education here, and I'll talk then about the PGCEi course, specifically what we're trying to do, how it works, how it's put together. We'll talk about how you go about applying for the course, and as Helen said, we'll then have an opportunity for any questions, and we'll do my best to answer those. So I hope this proves to be useful for you. So University of Nottingham is one of the most established universities in the UK. It's part of the elite Russell Group, so-called Russell Group group of universities. So very well known, with a very good reputation in the UK and also globally. As you can see here, ranked in the top 1% of universities worldwide. We have campuses here in Nottingham in the UK, but also in China and Malaysia. And we do a great deal of work overseas in all sorts of ways. So there really is a kind of global international feel to this university. The School of Education within the University of Nottingham is a really important part of what we do. It's one of the biggest schools of education in the country, and it's been going for more than 100 years. It's ranked very highly in tables. So for research, for example, in education, it's ranked currently 3rd in the UK. For education as a subject, ranked 4th in the UK. So it's a department that's got a lot of history to it and a lot of expertise. And so the name University of Nottingham and the School of Education within the University of Nottingham is something that carries a really good reputation. It's a good qualification to have. So we'll move on and talk a bit more about the course itself. So the Postgraduate Certificate in Education International, which we'll call the PGCEi, is a master's level program of study. So this is a year-long program of academic study, and it's specially designed for educators who are working in countries outside the UK. It's a course that runs all over the world. We currently have something like in excess of 1,000 students studying in continents all over the world, from Asia, South America to Europe and so on. So this is a global course, and around the world we have different cohorts that meet regionally, and we have teams of tutors that work in different regions. So in the Middle East region, we have our cohort, which is based for its face-to-face teaching in the UAE. So this is a course, it's important to point out, that's an academic program of study. It's not a practical teaching course. So it's not a course that will assess you in school, in your workplace. There's no assessment of your teaching. There's no requirement to have assessed placements. And therefore it doesn't offer any kind of license to teach, qualified teacher status. So it's not offering that professional teaching qualification or license. It's an academic qualification. Having said that, it's a qualification that should be very useful in your career. It's something that will enrich your practice and will offer you something for the resume that's very, very valuable. And working at master's level is something that will, I hope, expand your boundaries. So as it says on the third point here, we're talking about trying to get you to reflect on what you do, trying to step beyond your current workplace and be aware of educational issues in a broader sense. And in doing that, your practice will be massively enhanced and developed. So I know from my own experience working, when I was working as a teacher in school, I did a master's level program myself. I completed a full MA, and it really transformed my thinking, because it made me question some assumptions and some practices that I had, and just got me to kind of stand back from the everyday practice and think differently about things, and really relaunched the work I was doing in schools, I think. So I think there's tremendous benefit there, but it's important to realize what the course is setting out to do and what it's not setting out to do. You'll see here in the bold type, it says that this is a blended learning program. So what we mean by that is this is a course that has face-to-face teaching and learning at a distance. So in the UAE, we have two face-to-face workshops that take place over weekends at 2 points in the year. So at the start of the course, a team of tutors such as myself come out from the UK, and we work with you in the UAE and do some face-to-face teaching over a really intensive but enjoyable weekend. And then about halfway through the course, we come back again and we do a second workshop over another weekend and work with you, build you towards the second half of the course. And in between that time, you're in contact with your tutor. So you have a designated tutor, a named tutor that you've met face-to-face at the start of the course, who you will then keep in contact with from a distance in between those face-to-face events. The other good thing about these face-to-face workshops and this blended learning approach is it gets you to meet other educators from the region. So a big part of those meetings is not just what you learn from us and what you hear in the sessions. It's actually getting to meet and work with people from a wide range of different educational settings. So people from working in different countries, people working in different types of school. So we may have people working on a US curriculum, a British curriculum, IB curriculum, many other sorts of curricula. People working in different cultures and very different environments. And so the amount you learn from one another and the networks that you build at those face-to-face events are in many ways equally as important as what you get in terms of the formal teaching. The team of tutors, I should point out, are quite diverse. We all come from educational backgrounds. Most of us come from school teaching backgrounds, but that might be primary teaching. Some of us are secondary teachers. We have people who've been advisors, head teachers, people who've worked in English language teaching. So the team that we come out to the UAE with, which is usually 5 tutors, represents a really diverse range of expertise and experience. So the course structure, it's a 4-module course. I've already said that it takes place over a year. The actual study period is probably about 10 months, but we call it a year's course. So you have 4 modules that you take. These are compulsory modules, so there's no elective choices there. Everybody follows the same program of study in that sense. And they're equally weighted, 15 credit modules, building up to 60 credits, of course, by the end. Within those modules, though, there's a great deal of scope to personalize your study. So we have every year on the course, every cohort will have educators who are working perhaps in kindergarten age groups, all the way through to the oldest students in the school system. And although the material and the input we have is fairly generic and covers all of those age ranges, the way that you interpret it and the things that you write about, the tasks that you carry out, these are going to be things you can tailor to your own setting. So if you're a secondary mathematics teacher, for example, you can work on all your assignments in the context of secondary mathematics and write about that context. If you're teaching pupils who are 6 years old across a range of subjects, that's the context you're going to be writing about. And if you work in a support role with pupils with special educational needs, you can tailor everything to that context, and so on. So it gives you a chance to really make sure that you can work through the modules in a way that's relevant to you. And within each of the modules, although the module itself is compulsory, the content within the module has various potential areas to choose from. So there are lots and lots of units, and in 3 out of the 4 modules, you'll get a chance to choose the units that are most relevant to you. So the modules covered on the second bullet point here that really take you on a journey. So we start off with a module we call contexts. And this is about what we mean by education, what we mean by international education specifically, and asks a question about what education is really for, what the purposes of education are. So you could say, for instance, that education is about preparing somebody for a world of work. You could say that education is about developing a well-rounded individual in a holistic way. You could say education is about contributing to a country's economic prosperity, and so on. So there are many different views on what education is for and why we educate and how we educate. So we're going to explore all of those kind of issues in the international context in that first module. The second module then, having asked what education is for, looks at learning, and we look at theories of learning, and we discuss different interpretations and different perspectives about how students learn. As a natural progression from that, module 3 looks at approaches to teaching. So we look at various aspects, various techniques and strategies. And we look at issues like, for example, collaborative teaching, teaching learners with special educational needs or English as an additional language. We look at behaviour, assessment, a lot of the day-to-day issues that educators are working with. And the final module, having thought about what education is for and how we learn and how we might teach, really asks the question, well, how do we know if somebody has understood any of those things? So we get you to do a mini research project on a very, very small scale so that you can find out about an aspect of what you teach your learners, what you teach your students, and investigate their understanding of a particular concept. And it also gives you a chance to practice doing some research in a classroom setting, which is something you may want to do in future. There are no exams on the course. Each of those modules is assessed in the same way, really, with a 3,000-word assignment. So those assignments are things that we build you up to and support you with gradually. Some people are very, very comfortable with writing 3,000 words of academic writing. Other people find that quite a daunting prospect, and that's understandable. Sometimes maybe people have been out of education themselves as a student for a number of years, or maybe they studied a completely different discipline in a different cultural context. So in many ways, we know that this is something people need to adjust to. So through the face-to-face workshops, we make sure that we give you lots of guidance on academic writing in this discipline of education. And each assignment involves you submitting a proposal, first of all, to your tutor. So your tutor will give you guidance and feedback and make sure that you're working towards the right kind of end product. And on the first module, we also allow you and expect you to submit a draft of the assignment, which isn't marked, but you get very, very detailed feedback on that. So before you submit your first assessed assignment, you've had a chance to have lots of feedback on a draft that you've written. So in all sorts of ways, and also by looking at models of past assignments, we can give you a chance to think about how you're going to do this and what we're expecting. So most people initially are thinking of the PGCEi as a qualification in its own right, a one-year course, but it's also something that could be the beginning of further study for you. So I've already mentioned that you receive 60 credits at master's level if you pass all of the modules at that level, and those credits can be used and transferred towards an MA in education. So the University of Nottingham MA in education is a really well-known and well-respected qualification to have. And essentially, by completing the PGCEi, you've completed a third of that qualification. So if you choose to transfer your credits in, you don't need to do that immediately. You could do it a number of years later if you wanted to. You can transfer your 60 credits into the MA in education and be a third of the way along. We also have more specialist routes. You can see here some examples like special needs, educational leadership and management, and so on. So any of those specialist routes, and there are many others, you can transfer usually 30 credits from this course. All of the materials that you need for the PGCEi are provided really as part of the package. So you have access to all sorts of readings, video material, audio material directly through the VLE that we teach through. In addition to that, you have access to the university's electronic library, and through there you have access to electronic journals, electronic books. So you don't need to be buying books yourself. You don't need to have access to a physical library. You can get everything you need provided as part of the course. You also have a great deal of tutorial support. So your tutor, as I've mentioned, is there for you throughout the course. So I personally have a group at the moment of close to 20 students who I've met now twice this year, and I've enjoyed working with them through the year, and we're in contact on a regular basis. Often that's by email. If we need to have a discussion, we can talk through Skype or through a different medium if Skype isn't possible, and we can have tutorial support in that way. So we have frequent contact and frequent support. You also have support from your peers. I mentioned before how important the face-to-face workshops are for meeting and networking with other educators in your region, and that continues throughout the course because there are forums online where we encourage and expect you to post ideas about some of the topics we're talking about and to hear ideas from your fellow students. And in fact, some of those forums are not only open to students from this particular region, but they're what we call global forums. And you will have comments coming in from people studying this course in Africa or South America or all over the world. And it makes for a fascinating discussion. And it adds to that awareness that you want to have as an international educator of education around the globe. So thinking about the entry requirements here, this is a postgraduate level course, master's level course. So the usual position is that you would be a graduate, you would have your bachelor's degree, and usually that's second class honours level. We do occasionally accept people without that first degree if they have considerable professional or equivalent professional experience. So that's something, if you are in that position and you think you have other qualifications that may be worth us considering in place of that first degree, then you should contact us and we can advise you on that. If English isn't your first language, you can see here that there's an IELTS standard that you need to meet. And really that's to ensure that you can access the materials and the teaching and get the most out of the course. The other things you need to bear in mind are that you need to be, it says here, an established educator. That could mean all sorts of things. You could be a teacher, you could be a classroom support assistant, or maybe you have another role in an education setting. We've had people in the past who've been education librarians or have had other more diverse roles. But what you need is access to a classroom. Some of the modules will require you to reflect on lessons that you've taught. Now, they might be lessons that you've taught to a small group, if that's your typical role. They might be lessons that you've taught on a voluntary basis, if you're actually volunteering in school. But in one way or another, you need access to the classroom. And you also need to have access to the computer, the internet as well, and be reasonably computer literate just in terms of working with us on the elements that are done through the virtual learning environments that I mentioned. I've already talked here about non-standard applications. So if your profile doesn't quite fit what we've just described, then do contact us still, and we can advise you on whether you can still make a really strong application. So here, there's some of the requirements for applying. I'm not going to read through this list, but you can see there what's important to us. One of the things I'll pick out is the third point, which is about the personal statement. So this is an important part of your application where you really want to explain, first of all, why you want to do the course, what's your motivation in doing the course, but then of course, why are you well suited to doing this? So this is where you want to talk about your experience in education, what you bring also in terms of transferable skills. If you are coming with a non-standard application, so if you are coming without a first degree, this is where it's also particularly important to emphasize your academic credentials. How will you convince us that you are ready to work at this master's level? What have you done in the past? And perhaps that might come through your reference as well. Is there something that says here that you are working or capable of working at that academic level, that you manage your time well, you're a good communicator, some of those important kind of qualities. So in terms of timescales, we have 2 cohorts each year that start off at different times in this region, in the UAE. So our next cohort will be starting in October this year, and I will almost certainly be leading that cohort, and I'm really looking forward to working with a new group of students again. You can see here the deadlines for applying. The course begins on the 1st of October. It's not listed here, but we then have each year a March intake as well. So if you feel perhaps you're not going to be ready for an October intake, there's also a March start instead. Do apply as soon as you can because places are limited. When the course is full, that's when we have to stop recruiting. So we do have an upper limit. So it's in your interest to apply fairly promptly and ensure you get your place. So for this cohort starting on the 1st of October that I mentioned, our next cohort, you can see here when our workshop meetings would be in the UAE. So you can see the first one is very, very close to the start of the course. So the course is starting October 1st, and you can see a couple of weeks later, that's when you meet your tutor and you have all of the input that gets you started on modules 1 and 2. A few months later, at the start of March, you can see this is where we have the input for modules 3 and 4. And we have that really nice moment where we come back together as a group and you can renew those acquaintances and meet us again and meet your fellow students again midway through the course. You can see here details also of the fees, which are payable in installments through the year. So we've reached that moment where I've given you probably quite a lot of things to think about, but I'm sure there'll be things that you want to follow up on, questions you want to ask. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to get Helen to have a look at some of your questions and to perhaps group together things that are similar and put those to me, and we'll do our best to answer.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, Dr. Rupert. We have a first question from Shireen. What is the deadline for the first assessment?
Okay, so that varies slightly each year, and we need to work around things like people's term times, school holidays, things like Ramadan, etc. So it varies slightly every year. But to give you an idea of this year, I'm going to check over to my left and see the dates for this year. So this year, we had some coursework that came in the middle of November. The draft assignment that I mentioned, which isn't marked but gives you detailed feedback, was at the beginning of December. And the first assessed piece, first graded piece, so the assignment for Module 1, was about a week into January. So you start at the beginning of October, and probably your first submission of your first assignment is going to be January, but you've had some things that build up to that.
Okay, and Katerina, I will answer your questions regarding the March application deadline. We normally advise students to try and send their application as early as December. However, the application deadline is around about the second week of January 2019. But do try and send us your application before the end of the year. Okay, how do I gain my QTS following the course, which is a question from Andrew.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So this is a question that comes up a lot, understandably. So first thing to just be very clear about is QTS itself is a UK qualification. Countries around the world will all have their own requirements in terms of a particular license to teach. And in some cases, for instance, in the US, each state might even have its own different requirements. So it's quite a complex business in terms of, first of all, being clear about where you want to teach and making sure that you find out about that particular country and their requirements. Having said that, if you are talking specifically about qualified teacher status, QTS in the UK, the usual pathway that you can do is what we call an assessment-only route to QTS. So this is a route whereby someone who's an experienced teacher, who's worked in schools already, but doesn't have that UK qualification, can gain that qualification on the job. So usually in the UK, it would involve you working in a school initially as an unqualified teacher, and then being assessed through portfolio that you produce and through observations of your teaching that are carried out. And that can take place, it varies depending on your experience. It can take place over as short a period as one term sometimes. So assessment-only routes are offered by a number of providers, a number of universities throughout the UK. So it depends very much on where you'd want to work. The University of Nottingham doesn't currently offer assessment-only, but we would certainly be able to point you towards other universities around the country that do offer that. And you could find out yourself as well if you wanted just to go online and search for assessment-only routes into teaching. You'll find the government's website there, gov.uk website, which will have information about that. So that would usually be your route if you're thinking of specifically teaching in England or Wales.
Okay, super. And a question from Dima. Can you please advise what you will be looking for in my personal statement? Okay,
so really this is about, I think, three things which recap what we said before in essence. So one thing would be about your motivation. Why do you want to do this course? What are you hoping to gain from it? What do you want to get out of it? Where do you hope it's going to take you? So we want people who've got a really strong intrinsic motivation for doing this, as well as perhaps seeing it as, in some cases, as being a necessity. So what's your motivation, first of all? Secondly, what's your experience in education? and perhaps in your academic work that equips you well to do this. What's your current role? What are you doing that will enable you to be familiar with education and to come to the course ready to study? And the third thing would be about your other transferable skills. So things that we mentioned before about time management, communication, and so on. What do you bring from other situations, and what specific examples can you give that you think might be useful there? And as I hinted at before, the things in your personal statement can be strongly reinforced in the reference that you provide as well. So if you choose someone as a referee who can speak about those particular aspects of what you do and can be guided by you to comment on those things, of course what they say about them is up to them, but that you can ask them to comment on those things, that will really help us as well.
And the next question is quite a popular one, asked by Amber. How many hours a week should I be dedicating to my studies?
Okay, so to Amber and anyone else, of course it varies. People work at different paces, but each module, 15 credit module, the standard formula for a course like this would be that equates to 150 hours of effort for that module. And if you break it down week by week, it would come out to approximately something like 12 hours. So that might sound like quite a lot, but this is something that you can work on in different ways. Some people have a routine where they might work a couple of hours each evening or some other time in the day. Other people would say that's not feasible because I've got other commitments, work, family, etc. So I will just dedicate a day at the weekend and put in a long day and really work very hard at the weekend. So there are different ways that you can approach that. And some people may be able to work on fewer hours than that. But we tend to say as a guide, something like 12 hours. It does lead to an obvious question that people also ask about, which is, can I possibly do that on top of a full-time job? Because if you start to do the maths and you think about it, it sounds a little bit unlikely, a bit scary. But every year, the majority of our students are working on this alongside their full-time employment, and they do make it work. And the vast majority are very successful in doing that. It's something that's going to enhance your day-to-day role, so it's not entirely separate. It will be something that can be in some ways built into what you do. But also you will find that you've got more capacity than you think. If you've got that strong motivation, which is coming back to the personal statement question, one of the reasons for being interested in that is that will drive you. And also going back to what I said about my own experience of doing master's level work when I was teaching full-time in school, and at the time there were I had 2 young children at the time. So I remember beforehand, I sat and I got a piece of paper and a pencil, and I tried to work out how many hours this would be and if this was going to work. And I came to the conclusion that no, definitely this was not going to work. But I did it anyway because I was motivated to do that, and it was absolutely fine. And I'm sure you will be able to do that.
Super. And Nadia's question is, without a practical assessment, how can the course support our practice, or rather improve our practice?
Okay, so I'd say in 2 ways really. One, in perhaps a longer term way, is that you're going to be exposed to all sorts of ideas about education. Some of the themes we talked about to do with learning, for example. These are things that are going to be directly applicable to what you do in school, and you'll be able to read more about certain techniques that you may not have used very much of, and depending on your setting and what you're able to do within those constraints. You may be able to introduce different ways of working based on what you've read and some of the ideas you've got from readings, from the taught sessions, from your fellow students. So there is all of that that's really, really useful. And there's also the sense that you are going to be writing about your particular practice. So each of the assignments you do is going to be involving in different ways, you reflecting on what you do and how the theory that you've encountered can inform that and improve that, and then how that has enabled you to move forwards. So the assignments themselves are almost forcing you to make those links, make those connections. So it's the exposure to ideas, and it's the discipline of then applying those ideas to your practice. So while the course is not, as I've said already, it's not involving you being observed teaching, and it's not impacting you in that sense, there will be an awful lot of new techniques and things that you could try out immediately the next day in your classroom that you could implement. So we're not a course that's about offering tips, sort of practical tips for the classroom. It's at a higher level than that, but there are things nevertheless that you can go and implement.
Okay, and Felicia's question is, under the understanding that there are 4 assessments in total and a project, what is involved in that final project?
So the final assignment is a small research project. It's only going to be a 3,000 word assignment though, so you immediately can see it's not going to be a large scale piece of work. Really, this is involving you working with a small group of students and finding out something more about how they understand a particular concept. So that might involve you setting them a task over a number of occasions and observing them, for example. It might involve you carrying out some interviews. So you'll be collecting some data in a small and manageable way, and you'll be linking that to some readings about what we know about understanding, theories of understanding, and also about the particular subject matter that you're teaching. So if you're teaching grammar in English, for example, that's something you'll read about. So you're going to link that theory, you're going to then collect some data and see what that data tells you about your students' understanding. So it's very, very limited, very small scale, but the process you work through will include all of the elements of a research project of any scale. So it'll include methodological considerations about how you gather data. It includes ethics. It includes presenting some findings, discussing those findings. So we're going to take you through a process that all researchers use, and some of you will be familiar with that from previous study. So it's almost a model for future inquiry into your classroom practice that you could carry out beyond the course, either in a formal way through continuing your MA and doing a dissertation at the end of it, or just informally by seeking to improve your practice.
Okay, and Mark, I'll just answer your question. Unfortunately, at present, there are no face-to-face workshops in Qatar or Kuwait. Okay, and Anita's question, is it necessary to be part of a school per se while doing this program?
Not necessarily. You don't need to be a member of staff, but we come back to that requirement about saying you need regular access to a classroom. So we do have people sometimes who are just about to get into a teaching career, and they are in school maybe on a voluntary basis, and that's okay. You could work on that basis. The only thing to consider is that your third module involves you teaching a sequence of lessons, so between 3 and 5 lessons on a particular topic, and your assignment revolves around you writing about that experience. So you would need to feel confident that if you were in a school as an outsider, as a volunteer perhaps, that you could work with even at least a small group of learners by that stage in the course, that you'll be allowed to do that, and you could carry out a sequence of lessons with them. If that seems to be feasible, then that's okay. So you don't need to be a member of staff, but you do definitely need access to a classroom.
Super. And Katerina is currently in the UAE, but she is going to be moving to Norway as of the 1st of August. So her question is, can she join the March cohort but go to the UK instead of traveling all the way to the UAE to do the face-to-face workshops?
Okay, so we have these cohorts around the world. So today we're really talking about the UAE cohort, of course, but there is a cohort in the UK every year. So it may be that that's a good cohort for you to look at. So if you went to our website, and if you can just find that simply by Googling University of Nottingham, PGCEi, you can see the various venues we have, and we have a number in Europe. In terms of Northern Europe, really, it would be either the UK or perhaps Prague. You could go to Prague, but there are various locations in Europe. So not in Norway itself, but yes, there's a cohort in the UK, and I believe, although I don't work on it myself, that meets in July. So at the end of the school year, they tend to do an intensive week in July and do all of their face-to-face teaching at once, and then continue after that.
Okay, next question is, will I be able to go to the university and graduate, or will my diploma be sent to me here in the UAE?
You're certainly very welcome to come here for graduation, and we love to see our students from this course at graduation. So yes, you definitely can come here to graduate, and you will be invited to do that. Of course, we recognise that probably the majority of students are not able to make that journey, and so of course you can graduate virtually in your absence, and you would still be sent your certificates, and you'd become a graduate without attending. But if you can attend, then that's really, really good. If you are in a cohort starting in October, then our graduation ceremony is usually in December. So you'd finish your studies around about July, and then over the summer you'll be away probably doing other things, and then in December there's a graduation ceremony that you'd be invited to, and I'll be there, and it will be great to see anyone there, and it's a nice way maybe to round off the year and come and spend a bit of Christmas time in the UK.
True. And if I fail my assignment, will I have another chance to submit?
Yeah, so the usual procedure is that if you fail your assignments, you have one chance to resubmit in each case. That wouldn't be done just blindly by just asking you to do it again. So almost always that would involve you just reworking and adapting your assignment. And you do that based on two lots of feedback. So one piece of feedback would be the standard, very detailed feedback your tutor would give you for every assignment anyway. So your tutor would give you written feedback that would explain what you need to change. And also, if anyone's in that position, we would almost always have a tutorial with them via Skype, or as I've said, perhaps in the UAE it wouldn't be Skype, but on a different platform. And we would talk face to face and have a double check that you understood exactly what you need to put right and how to do that. And then you would have a chance to resubmit. And usually the resubmission would be about 6 weeks after your result comes out. So you've got plenty of time, nobody's asking you to do it immediately, and you would rework your assignments along those lines.
Okay, and if I cannot complete the program in 12 months due to unforeseen circumstances, what is the maximum duration that I can complete the program?
So we know that in every cohort, probably one or two people, something is going to happen in life that they weren't expecting. If it's a brief situation, you can apply for an extension to an assignment, which I know is not exactly what you're asking about, but you can do that if you have evidence, like medical evidence, for example. If it's something a bit longer term and you need to take some time away from the course, as long as there are good reasons to do that, then you can take what we call a voluntary interruption to study, which we call a VIS. So a VIS can be for an agreed period of time. It could be It could be a few months, or it could be longer, could be a year. It depends on what your circumstances are. The maximum registration period is 3 years though. So you just need to be clear that however much time you take away, you've left yourself sufficient time, because you must have completed the course within that 3-year period.
Okay, and if I cannot attend a workshop, what will happen to my studies? I am under the understanding that workshops are compulsory.
Yeah, that's important to be clear about. So the workshops, face-to-face workshops, are compulsory. Even if they weren't, it would be really, really ill-advised to miss them, because this is where you're going to get so much information about the units you're studying and the assignments. It's actually quite difficult to complete the course successfully without having that kind of input. So it's really, really important that you attend those workshops. Really, you know, if you're not able to come along in October, for example, we would be asking you to enroll on a subsequent cohort instead, and you could withdraw from that cohort in October, for example, and you could join a March cohort. So you need to, first of all, make sure before you begin, before you enroll, that you can make those dates. If, for example, you've come along to the first workshop in October and then something has happened, you're halfway through the course, and perhaps there's been a bereavement in the family or something just before the second workshop, something really significant has happened that prevents you from coming, we would then ask you to go through a process of applying for an exemption from that workshop. It's a formal process. You'd need to provide evidence of why you're not able to come, and we would look at that evidence, and hopefully we wouldn't be holding up your studies and saying you can't complete, but it would need to be a very, very good reason and with evidence. If it was relating to the first of the workshops, though, really we would be saying it's not the right time to start. You need to come back in a few months, come back to the next cohort.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I don't see any more questions, Dr. Rupert. I think we've managed to actually go through them quite quickly. I have grouped some of them together as well. And I think that's all for this afternoon. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Rupert. It was lovely having you with us. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It was great having you with us. And do get in touch with your academic consultant at Stafford. We are currently accepting applications for this coming cohort, and we do have quite a lot of applications already, so do send those documents to us as soon as possible. Thank you, everyone, and a good afternoon to you all.
Okay, bye everyone, and hope to see some of you on our next cohort. Thank you.